Hello, and welcome back to Grave Whispers. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from. I love reading every single one. If you enjoy whispers rising straight from the grave, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Now, get comfortable. Dim the lights if you dare. Relax your mind. Let the outside world fade away. And let's begin. Story 1, it started with small things. The kind of things that were easy to ignore when they happened alone. Electronics often stopped working whenever Arjun was around. At first, I thought it was nothing more than bad luck. My laptop froze and refused to turn on twice while he was using it. Both times, I had to take it to a repair shop. The technician could not give me a clear explanation. He said something inside had shorted out, but he had no idea what had caused it. The second time it happened, Arjun laughed and told me I needed to stop buying cheap electronics. The laptop was less than a year old. Then my refrigerator stopped working one evening while he was visiting. I only noticed because I heard the motor make a strange whining sound before everything went silent. The light inside went out, the display went black, and the food began warming up. Arjun helped me load everything into my car. We drove the food to my parents' house so it would not go bad while I waited for someone to repair the fridge. He acted like a good friend, making jokes to keep me calm while we carried bags of frozen food into my parents' garage. The refrigerator worked perfectly again after it was repaired. No one could explain what had gone wrong with it. Another time, Arjun plugged his phone charger into an outlet in my living room, and the circuit breaker immediately tripped. Every light in the house went out at once. We stood in darkness for several seconds before Arjun started laughing. "Your house hates me," he said. At the time, I laughed, too. After he left, I turned the breaker back on and tested the same outlet. I used his charger, my own charger, a lamp, and even a small heater. Nothing happened. The electricity stayed on. It only tripped when Arjun had touched the plug. There were other things, too. Arjun had always had incredibly good hearing. I do not mean that he could hear slightly better than most people. His hearing was unnatural. There were countless times when I whispered something in another room, and he answered me. Sometimes there was a closed door between us. Sometimes the television was playing or water was running, but he still heard every word. Once, I decided to test him. He was standing outside my bedroom while I sat at my desk with the door closed. I whispered so quietly that I could barely hear myself. Arjun is an idiot. From the other side of the door, he immediately said, "I heard that." I opened the door and found him grinning at me. There was no way he should have been able to hear it. I tried again a few days later. This time, he was in my kitchen while I stood in the hallway near the stairs. I covered my mouth with my hand and whispered a random sentence. "The blue bird sleeps under the bridge." Arjun looked up from his phone. "What blue bird?" I told myself he had guessed that I had said something. Maybe my voice carried through the house in some strange way. Old buildings often had unusual acoustics. That was the explanation I chose because I did not want to think about the other possibilities. The mirrors were harder to explain. A few times I caught Arjun's reflection behaving strangely. It never happened when I stared directly into a mirror. It only happened in quick moments, when I saw his reflection from the corner of my eye. Sometimes the reflection seemed slightly delayed. Arjun would turn his head, but the figure in the mirror would remain still for half a second before copying him. When Arjun raised his hand, his reflection seemed to move too slowly, as though it were being controlled by someone who did not fully understand what he was doing. Other times, the reflection made the wrong expression. Once, Arjun was sitting behind me while I was washing my hands in the bathroom. He was talking about a woman he worked with who had accidentally sent an embarrassing email to the whole office. I was smiling at the story when I looked into the mirror. Arjun was smiling too, but his reflection was not. The reflection's eyebrows were pulled together in anger. Its lips were pressed into a hard line, and its eyes were fixed on the back of my head. I turned around. Arjun was still smiling. When I looked back into the mirror, his reflection was smiling normally again. Another time, I saw his reflection stretching its mouth into a grin that was far too wide. It looked as if the corners of its lips had been pulled toward its ears. The expression lasted less than a second before it became normal. I convinced myself that the light had distorted his face. I was tired. I was stressed. My mind was playing tricks on me. Those were the excuses I used. Sometimes, I also thought I saw Arjun watching me when he should not have been. I would catch a glimpse of him glaring from the corner of my vision. His eyes would look dark, angry, and focused entirely on me. The moment I turned toward him, I would only see the back of his head beneath his messy black hair. He would be looking in the opposite direction. It never happened with anyone else. Only him. Still, Arjun was my best friend. We had known each other for years. We worked at the same company, went backpacking together, watched movies, complained about our jobs, and spent most weekends at my place. He had been there for me during some of the worst moments of my life. When my last relationship ended, he stayed awake with me until sunrise, listening while I talked about everything that had gone wrong. When my father had surgery, Arjun drove me to the hospital and waited with me for hours. He was not perfect, but he was loyal. I trusted him. That made it easier to ignore the strange things. I dismissed all of it until last week. It was Friday evening when I drove to his house. Arjun had left some work papers at my place earlier that week. They were important, and I knew he would need them before Monday. Normally, I would have called before visiting, but I assumed it would be a quick stop. I planned to hand him the papers, talk for a few minutes, and leave. Arjun usually came to my house. We often met at restaurants, bars, or hiking trails, but I rarely visited his place. There was no special reason for that. His house simply felt less comfortable. It always seemed colder than mine, even in summer. The rooms were clean but empty, and Arjun kept many of the doors closed. Whenever I asked what was behind them, he would make a joke or change the subject. I did not think much about it at the time. His house stood near the end of a quiet street where most of the buildings looked almost identical. They were small, white houses with narrow yards and gray roofs. Arjun's home was easy to recognize because of its bright, red front door. The color stood out against the dull houses around it. I parked outside and walked up the path with the papers tucked beneath my arm. As I got closer, something felt wrong. I stopped at the bottom of the steps and looked around. Everything seemed normal. The outside of the house was as clean and white as always. 2 broken flower pots sat beneath the front window. 3 slightly dirty concrete steps led to the entrance. The curtains were shut, but that was not unusual. Nothing had changed. Still, I felt a strange tug at the back of my mind. It was like realizing you had forgotten something important, but being unable to remember what it was. The feeling grew stronger as I climbed the steps. I stood in front of the red door and raised my hand toward the metal knocker. For a moment, I hesitated. Then, I knocked. No one answered. I waited and knocked again, louder this time. Arjun? I called. There was no movement inside. I took out my phone and called him. It rang several times before going to voicemail. That was unusual. Arjun almost always answered, especially when he knew I might be calling about work. I tried the door handle. To my surprise, it turned. The door slowly opened inward. I stared at the dark gap between the door and the frame. Arjun never left his front door unlocked. He was not paranoid, but he was careful. He checked locks twice before going to bed. When we traveled, he always made sure our bags were secured. He was the kind of person who noticed small risks before anyone else did. My chest tightened. For a few seconds, I wondered if someone had broken into the house. Maybe Arjun had been attacked. Maybe he was hurt somewhere inside. I stood there with one hand on the door, trying to slow my breathing. I told myself I was being dramatic. People forgot to lock doors. It happened all the time. Perhaps Arjun had gone outside for a few minutes, or had rushed out because of an emergency. I pushed the door open farther. Arjun? My voice sounded weak inside the silent house. I stepped over the threshold and closed the door behind me. The living room was empty. Arjun's house had an open layout, so from the entrance I could see most of the ground floor. The living room connected to a small dining area and a hallway that led toward the stairs. Nothing appeared damaged. The television was off. No music was playing. There were no footsteps, voices, or sounds of someone moving upstairs. The silence felt heavy. If Arjun had been home, I would have expected to hear something. He usually cooked in the evening. If he was not cooking, he watched television or listened to music. The house was never this quiet when he was there. I called his name again. Nothing answered. I placed the papers on a small table near the entrance and walked toward the stairs. Each step creaked beneath my weight. Arjun, it's me. I called. Your door was open. I checked the upstairs bathroom first. It was empty. The towels were neatly folded and the sink was dry. I checked the spare bedroom, which Arjun used as an office. His computer was turned off. A chair sat beneath the desk, and several notebooks were arranged in a perfect row. His bedroom was untouched. The bed had been made. His clothes still hung inside the large built-in closet. His shoes were lined up against the wall. Beside them was the old hiking backpack he always carried when we went into the mountains. If he had left town unexpectedly, he would have taken it. I looked beneath the bed and inside the closet, feeling foolish as I did so. There was no sign of a struggle. Nothing had been stolen. It did not look like a break-in. But if Arjun had simply left, why had he left the door open? Why was his phone turned off? I called again. The call went straight to voicemail. The uneasy feeling in my chest became worse. I returned downstairs and walked through the living room, trying to decide what to do. Part of me wanted to call the police, but I knew how it would sound. My adult friend was not answering his phone, and his front door was unlocked. That was strange, but it was not enough to report him missing. I was about to leave when I remembered the kitchen. It was the only room I had not checked. Unlike the rest of the ground floor, the kitchen was separated from the living room by a wall. You could not see inside it from the front entrance. I walked around the corner. The kitchen door was closed. It was made of dark stained wood, old and polished, with small cracks spreading through parts of the surface. A round black metal doorknob sat on the right side. I had seen the door before, but I had never paid much attention to it. I stood in front of it and listened. Nothing. My stomach tightened. I suddenly wanted to leave. I could not explain why. It was only a door. There was no reason to be afraid of it. Still, every part of my body seemed to warn me not to open it. I stepped back. I considered calling Arjun one more time, leaving the papers on the table, and getting out of the house. Then I remembered that I still did not know where he was. The kitchen was the only place left. I reached toward the doorknob. Before my fingers touched it, I heard something from the other side. A wet, violent noise. I froze. At first it sounded like someone throwing up. Then it sounded more like a cat coughing up a hairball, except deeper and much louder. The sound stopped. I waited. My hand hovered above the knob. Another noise came from inside, followed by a weak groan. "Arjun?" I whispered. No answer. I wrapped my fingers around the cold metal and slowly turned it. The door opened. The kitchen was almost completely dark. A yellow-orange light came from an open doorway on the opposite side of the room. It cast a dirty glow across the floor and cabinets, making everything look old and sick. I looked at the windows and realized all the blinds were closed. I did not even know Arjun's kitchen had blinds. Whenever I had seen the room before, sunlight had poured through the windows. Arjun always kept them open. The strange doorway on the other side of the kitchen led downward. That was when I remembered the basement. I had almost forgotten his house had one. I had never been down there. The basement door had always been closed and locked, so I had started thinking of it as a pantry or storage cupboard. In reality, there was a cold, windowless space beneath the house. I have never liked basements. There is something unnatural about being underground inside a home. No windows, no sunlight, and only a few narrow stairs leading back to safety. The hacking sound came again. It was much louder now. I nearly jumped out of my skin. The noise echoed from below, wet and rough, like something was choking while trying to vomit. My heart pounded so hard that I could feel it in my throat. Whatever was in the basement retched again. This time, the sound was followed by several heavy, wet thuds. It sounded as though large pieces of something had fallen onto the concrete floor. I stood near the kitchen door, unable to move. The house remained silent for several seconds. Then something spoke. The voice was harsh and broken. Each word came through a painful wheeze, as though the speaker's throat was filled with liquid. I could not understand it at first. The voice did not sound human. It was too deep in some moments and too sharp in others. Several sounds seemed to overlap, like different voices trying to speak through the same mouth. I should have left immediately. I should have run out the front door, called the police, and never returned. Instead, I walked toward the basement. I do not know what made me do it. The memory still feels strange, almost dreamlike. It was as if an invisible string had been tied around something deep inside my chest and was pulling me forward. My feet moved even though my mind was screaming at me to stop. I reached the basement doorway. A narrow set of wooden stairs led downward. Walls stood close on both sides, making the staircase look like a tunnel. The yellow-orange light came from somewhere at the bottom. The stairs ended on a concrete floor. From where I stood, I could not see the rest of the basement. The voice came again. This time I understood it. Fuck those bastards. The creature stopped to breathe. Each breath sounded wet and painful. Fuck them, it rasped. I hope, it began coughing. The cough shook through the basement, followed by another thick, choking sound. I hope they burn. I gripped the frame of the doorway. Despite the terror, I felt something else. Curiosity. Something impossible was down there. Until that moment, I had believed the world followed clear rules. Monsters belonged in stories. Creatures that spoke with inhuman voices did not hide beneath ordinary houses on quiet streets. But something was breathing at the bottom of those stairs. Something that could talk. Something that could feel anger. It sounded as though it hated someone. It also sounded terribly sick. Its breathing was labored, and each cough seemed painful enough to tear its lungs apart. Between breaths, I heard quiet groans echoing through the basement. For one horrible moment, I felt sorry for it. I wanted to help. The thought frightened me almost as much as the voice. I did not know what the creature was. I did not know what it could do. Maybe its weakness was an act. Maybe it knew that a sick, injured sound would make someone come closer. Perhaps it had learned how to use human sympathy like bait. I told myself to leave. That was the only sensible choice. I slowly moved one foot backward. Then, something appeared at the bottom of the stairs. A hand. It slid into the yellow light and pressed against the concrete floor. The hand was long and narrow, with fingers that looked too large for any human body. Curved black claws extended from each fingertip. Its skin was covered in bruised shades of green and black, as though the flesh had been dead for weeks. A clear, thick liquid coated the arm. It looked like mucus or melted gel, and it dripped onto the concrete in slow strings. The claws scraped across the floor. The sound made my teeth hurt. I could not breathe. My stomach twisted so violently that I thought I was going to vomit. It felt as though something alive was moving through my insides. I remained completely still. My mind went blank. The edges of my vision became dark, and the stairs seemed to move beneath me. The hand pulled against the concrete. More of the arm appeared. It was thin but unnaturally long, covered in the same wet substance. The liquid gathered beneath it, staining the floor dark gray. The creature grunted. Its claws dug into cracks in the cement. That was when I understood what it was doing. It was pulling itself toward the stairs. Toward me. I ran. I do not remember turning around. 1 second, I was staring at the arm. The next, I was racing through the kitchen. I hit my shoulder against the wall, but barely felt it. I crossed the living room, grabbed the front door, and almost tore it from its hinges. Behind me, I heard another wet cough. Then, I heard something scrape against the first wooden step. I did not look back. I ran outside, nearly falling down the concrete stairs. I reached my car, dropped my keys, picked them up with shaking hands, and locked myself inside. For several seconds, I sat behind the wheel, staring at the red front door. Nothing followed me. No one appeared in the windows. The house looked silent and normal. I started the car and drove home faster than I should have. Arjun began texting me about an hour later. The first message was simple. Hey. A few minutes later, another appeared. What's up? Then he wrote, I think I left some work papers at your place. I stared at the screen. The papers were still on the table inside his house. Another message arrived. Yo, dude, are you asleep? Then, you always text back so fast. The normality of the messages made everything worse. There was no mention of the open door. No question about why I had entered his home. No explanation for what had been in the basement. He wrote as though nothing had happened. I could not bring myself to answer. I kept imagining the creature pulling itself across the floor, dragging its long arm through the wet slime. I wondered where Arjun was when I entered the house. I wondered who was sending the messages. After a while, I stopped checking my phone. Then, Arjun began calling. The calls came again and again. Sometimes he called several times in a row. Other times, he waited an hour and tried again. I never answered. I blocked his number. The next morning, he called from a different phone. I blocked that one too. 2 days later, Arjun came to my house. I was sitting in my living room when I heard a knock at the door. I looked through the peephole. He stood outside wearing a dark jacket and jeans. His messy black hair hung across his forehead. He looked completely normal. "Hey," he called. "I know you're in there." I stayed silent. He knocked again. Did I do something? I backed away from the door. For several minutes, he stood on the porch. He called my name, asked me to open the door, and said he was worried about me. Eventually, he left. Before walking away, he looked directly at the living room window. The curtains were open. I could not tell if he saw me, but I shut them as soon as he turned toward the street. After that, I closed every curtain in the house. Arjun returned twice during the week. I did not answer either time. He sent emails from his work account. He contacted me through social media. He even asked one of our coworkers whether I was sick. I told everyone I needed space. I did not explain why. What could I possibly say? I had gone into my best friend's house and found a monster in his basement. No one would believe me. Sometimes I do not believe it myself. A week has passed, but I have barely slept. Each night I lie in bed and remember the basement. I hear the wet coughing. I see the black claws digging into the concrete. I imagine the creature reaching the stairs and pulling itself upward, one step at a time. I keep asking myself whether it escaped after I left. I keep wondering whether Arjun went home and found it there. Maybe he did not know about it. Maybe the creature had broken into his house. Maybe he was in danger too. I wanted to believe that. I tried to convince myself that Arjun was innocent. Then I remembered the voice. That was the part I could not escape. The creature's words had been rough, broken, and inhuman. Its throat had turned every sound into a painful rasp. But underneath all of that, I had recognized something. The tone, the rhythm, the way it paused between sentences, the way it said those bastards. It was Arjun's voice, not something similar to his voice, not a creature trying to copy him. It was him. I had spent enough time with Arjun to know the way he spoke. I knew the small changes in his voice when he was angry, amused, tired, or nervous. The thing in the basement had the same cadence, the same habits, the same voice. I cannot explain it, but I know what I heard. Since then, old memories have returned to me. The broken laptop, the refrigerator, the circuit breaker, his impossible hearing, the reflections that moved too slowly, the smile in the mirror that stretched far too wide, all those moments when I thought I saw him glaring at me. Maybe my mind was never playing tricks on me. Maybe I had been seeing small pieces of the truth. I do not know what Arjun is. Perhaps the person I knew was never human. Maybe the creature in the basement is his real body, and the man who walks around outside is only some kind of disguise. Maybe he changes forms. Maybe he sheds one body and grows another. The wet sounds I heard could have been part of that process. The large pieces hitting the floor might have been skin, bone, or something else I do not want to imagine. Or perhaps there are two of them. Maybe the creature is related to him. Maybe it is trapped beneath the house, and Arjun feeds it or keeps it hidden. But if that is true, why did it have his voice? Why did the electronics fail when he was near them? Why did his reflection sometimes act on its own? There is another possibility that frightens me more than the others. Maybe the creature in the basement was the real Arjun. Maybe the person texting me and standing outside my house is something else. I keep thinking about the papers. They were sitting inside his house near the front door. When he texted me, he said he thought he had left them at my place. If he had returned home, he would have seen them immediately. Unless he never entered through the front door. Unless the person who texted me did not know I had been there. Last night, someone knocked on my window. My bedroom is on the second floor. It happened at 3 a.m. 3 slow taps. I sat upright in bed, unable to move. The curtains were closed, but I could see a shadow on the other side of them. The shape was tall, too tall. I heard breathing outside the glass. Wet, uneven breathing. Then Arjun's voice whispered my name. I stayed silent until sunrise. When I finally opened the curtains, there was nothing there. But the window was covered in clear, sticky streaks, the same kind of liquid I saw dripping from the creature's arm. I have not left the house today. My phone keeps vibrating. Arjun is using another number. He has sent only one message. I know what you saw. I do not know what to do. I cannot go to the police because I have no proof. I cannot tell my family because they will think I am losing my mind. I cannot run because I do not know whether he can hear me, find me, or follow me wherever I go. He may already be listening. Arjun once heard me whisper through a closed door from the other side of my house. What if walls have never mattered to him? What if distance does not matter either? For years, I believed Arjun was my closest friend. I thought I knew him better than anyone. Now I am wondering whether I ever knew him at all. Maybe every conversation, every joke, and every kind thing he did was part of an act. Maybe the human face I trusted was nothing more than a mask. I keep trying to accept what I witnessed, but my mind refuses to make sense of it. How am I supposed to believe that monsters are real? How am I supposed to accept that one of them has been sitting in my home, eating my food, watching movies with me, and sleeping in the next tent during our backpacking trips? How am I supposed to accept that my friend, my best friend, is a monster? And if the thing outside my house really is Arjun, then what was the creature in his basement? A second knock just came from my bedroom window. This time, the glass cracked. Story 2. Does anyone else remember the Delphine Resort from the 1980s? Back then, it was one of the most famous summer resorts in Catalonia. Families traveled from different parts of Spain and other countries just to spend a few weeks there. After months of work, school, stress, and ordinary life, people came to Delphine to lie beneath the thick summer sun, swim in the cool blue pools, eat at the restaurants, and forget that the outside world existed. At least that was how the place was advertised. I was 16 years old when I first went there. That summer, my friends had decided that I could no longer waste every day playing video games at the arcade and eating sweet conchas until I fell asleep. According to them, I needed to find a job, earn some money, and perhaps start dating someone who was not my bed. At the time, I was staying with my grandparents in Catalonia. I had expected the visit to last only for the summer, though there was a chance I would stay longer before returning to the United States. My grandmother took the idea of finding me a job much more seriously than I did. One afternoon, she sat in front of the old family computer and searched through local job listings for anything that would accept a 16-year-old. I did not have much experience. I had taken a few swimming courses and some basic archery classes when I was younger. That was about it. I had never worked in a hotel, served food, cleaned rooms, or dealt with tourists. My grandmother had almost given up when she found an advertisement for the Delphine Resort. The screen showed bright blue waves in the background, with palm trees standing on either side of the resort's name. Even on that small, dull monitor, the place looked beautiful. The page was filled with photographs of children laughing in swimming pools, couples relaxing beneath umbrellas, and families smiling beside tables covered with food. There were different sections for accommodation, entertainment, restaurants, and employment. My grandmother quickly selected the part about summer jobs. A few days later, after a short interview and several swimming and safety tests, I was offered a position as a junior lifeguard. My grandfather drove me there on my first day. We passed rows of colorful houses, painted sidewalks, small cafes, and crowded summer streets. After about 30 minutes, the houses became less frequent, and tall green bushes appeared along both sides of the road. Palm trees stood behind them, their leaves moving gently in the warm wind. When the car stopped, I stepped outside and felt the breeze touch my face. My grandfather came around the other side of the car, and together we looked towards the entrance. The first thing I heard was the sound of children shouting and splashing in water. It was followed by music, laughter, and the distant ringing of glasses from one of the bars. A smile spread across my face. I walked towards reception while my grandfather waited near the car. Pink and yellow light shone through the large glass windows. Inside, the walls were decorated with paintings of old Catalan buildings, fishing villages, and historic streets. Several colored bookshelves stood evenly along one wall, filled with history books and tourist guides. A young woman sat behind the reception desk. She had light blue eyes and smooth brown hair falling over both shoulders. "How may I help you?" she asked. "Hi, I'm here to start work as a lifeguard," I replied. My voice came out rougher than I wanted. I was trying to sound confident, but I was distracted by everything around me. "Of course. May I have your name?" "Jairo Ruiz." "It's lovely to meet you, Jairo. Please take a seat while I let Bernard know that you have arrived." She turned towards the computer. I nodded and sat beside one of the bookshelves. Only a few seconds passed before a dark-haired man appeared in front of me. He was probably in his early 20s. He had hazel eyes and wore the same red and white lifeguard jacket I had been given. He smiled widely and held out his hand. "You must be Jairo. I'm Bernard." He led me out of reception and through the main entrance of the resort. I had seen photographs, but they had not prepared me for the size of the place. Small decorative rocks lined the grassy paths. Blue and green water slides twisted through the air, looping around one another before disappearing into wide swimming pools. Food bars stood beneath thick wooden roofs. Pink, white, and orange drinks bubbled inside clear machines under the shade. Music played from the indoor pool area. Every few steps, I heard another burst of laughter. My shoes struck the path in time with the music, and the warm air smelled of fruit, chlorine, fried food, and flowers. For a moment, I honestly thought I could live there forever. Bernard showed me the main pool area and explained how the resort was divided. There were two sections called Orca and Dolphin. Each section had its own hotel rooms, restaurants, pools, and entertainment areas. Bernard and I were assigned to Orca, where we mainly looked after families staying in that part of the resort. The largest pool was also divided into two sections. I was responsible for Section A, the front half near the stairs, shallow area, and main entrance. Bernard watched Section B at the back, close to the slides. You keep your eyes on the front, he told me. I'll watch the back. The biggest danger is a child getting trapped beneath one of those large floats. People think drowning always looks dramatic, but sometimes it is completely silent. I nodded and climbed into my chair. There were children everywhere. Some jumped into the pool while their parents shouted at them to stop running. Others floated on inflatable animals. Adults stood in the deeper water, talking and laughing while music played from the speakers. For the first hour, nothing serious happened. Then my radio crackled. "Hey, newbie. How are you doing?" Bernard asked. I looked across the pool. He waved at me and laughed into his radio. "All good over here. How are you keeping up?" I gave him a quick thumbs up. "Doing fine. A kid just made a mess in his towel and his mother is cleaning it up. But apart from that, everything is wonderful." I laughed and turned my attention towards a man climbing the steps of one of the smaller slides. After another quiet moment, I pressed the radio button. "Bernard, can I ask you something? How long have you worked here?" "A while," he answered. "But relax, Chico, you'll get used to it. You passed all the swimming tests and safety examinations. That means you belong here." A warning beep sounded through his radio, and our conversation ended. My eyes moved towards the largest blue slide. It stretched high above the pool and curved around itself several times. The green slide beside it was open at the top, so you could see people moving through it. The blue one was completely enclosed. Once someone entered, they disappeared into darkness until they came out at the bottom. For some reason, looking at it made me uncomfortable. I picked up some of my safety equipment and walked towards Bernard. "Hey, what's wrong?" he began. Before I could answer, a woman's scream cut through the noise. "Alejandra, Rosetta." A family rushed through the pool area, calling the names again and again. The mother looked terrified. The father searched behind chairs and beneath umbrellas, while another relative ran towards the changing rooms. Bernard's expression changed immediately. His friendly smile vanished. He hurried towards them. "What happened?" he asked. "Tell me exactly what is wrong." The mother stepped forward. Her hands shook so badly that she could barely hold them together. "Alejandra and Rosetta," she said. "We can't find them." We looked away for only a moment, and now they're gone. "Where did you see them last?" I asked. The woman's eyes widened. She pointed behind me, towards the blue slide. People had begun gathering around us. Parents called their children out of the pool. Some grabbed towels and bags, while others stood nearby, watching with frightened faces. I took my rescue equipment and entered the water. Bernard and several other workers tried to calm the crowd while I swam towards the slide. I reached the wooden ladder and climbed to the platform. From the top, I looked into the opening. The inside was dark. Even though I knew it was only a water slide, the black tunnel did not look like a place anyone should enter. It looked more like a hole leading beneath the resort. My heart began to beat faster. A cold feeling moved through my chest and arms, completely different from the warm air around me. Every part of my body seemed to warn me that something was wrong. I switched on my small flashlight and slowly lowered myself into the slide. One hand held the light, while the other pressed against the side to stop me from falling too quickly. I moved deeper into the darkness. At first, I heard only the water running beneath me. Then I heard something else. A child was crying somewhere farther down. I stopped moving. The sound echoed through the tunnel. For a moment, I thought I also heard a man speaking. His voice was low and strict, as if he were ordering someone to remain quiet. Then, two young girls began sobbing at the same time. The sound was distant, yet it seemed to surround me inside the slide. I pushed myself farther down. My heart pounded so hard that it hurt. The cries became louder and more desperate. Then, my hand slipped. I fell forward and began sliding. As I moved faster, the screaming moved with me. I expected to crash into someone at any moment, but there was nothing ahead except darkness. A small circle of light finally appeared. I shot from the end of the slide and landed in the pool. The crying stopped the moment I entered the water. I surfaced, took a breath, and looked around. I searched beneath the water and around the slide exit, but I saw no sign of the girls. Bernard called me towards him. I climbed out and hurried over. "We have a problem," I said. "Did you see them?" he asked. His eyes narrowed as he pulled me away from the family. "No, I didn't see anyone." Urgency crossed his face, but there was something else there, too. It did not look like surprise. It looked like fear mixed with recognition. He turned and called the family forward. For the rest of the day, everyone searched. Workers checked the hotel corridors, villas, restaurants, bars, bathrooms, gardens, pools, and every slide. Guests searched beneath tables and behind locked doors. The police were contacted, though they did not arrive until much later. Near the blue slide, someone found a small flower-shaped hair clip. The mother confirmed that it belonged to one of the girls. Nothing else was discovered. Alejandra and Rosetta had disappeared. Their family remained at the resort for several days. Their clothes, toys, and luggage stayed scattered through the villa where they had been staying. Bernard told me that the parents spent every minute searching for their daughters. Eventually, they had to return to their own country. I never heard what happened to them after that. Only 1 month later, another child disappeared from the Orca restaurant. He was 3 years old. His mother said she had looked down at the menu for a few seconds. When she looked up, his chair was empty. No one saw him leave. The restaurant had only 2 exits, and both were visible from nearby tables. Once again, the staff searched. Once again, nothing was found. I could not understand how the resort continued to operate as though nothing had happened. Families still arrived every morning. Children played in the same pool where Alejandra and Rosetta had last been seen. Adults ate expensive meals in the restaurant where a 3-year-old boy had vanished. The music continued. The drinks continued bubbling. The receptionists continued smiling. My grandmother begged me to find another job. I considered leaving many times, but I could not do it. Walking away felt wrong. Something was happening at Delphine, and I believed I might be able to stop it, or at least understand it. The incident that finally changed everything happened during my last shift of the week. The resort was closing for the night. Most guests had returned to their rooms, and the pool area was empty. My final job was to make sure everything was safe before leaving. I checked the gates, collected abandoned towels, and cleaned the pool. I was exhausted. My eyelids kept lowering as I picked up the long weed rake near the slides. I dragged it through the water, gathering leaves and small pieces of grass that had fallen into the pool. Each time I collected something, I emptied it into a bucket. I was preparing to make the last sweep when I noticed an object moving gently on the surface. At first, I thought it was a piece of pink fabric from someone's swimsuit. I stretched the rake towards it. The object moved with the water, slipping away from the metal several times before I finally caught it. I pulled it closer. My stomach twisted. It was a small pair of pink children's underwear, soaked with pool water. For several seconds, I could only stare. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. I lifted it with a rake to look more closely. There was no name written inside and nothing that clearly connected it to any missing child. Still, I felt certain that it should not have been there. Then movement above the pool caught my attention. I looked towards the wooden platform at the top of the blue slide. A man stood there. The moonlight was weak, and I could not see his face. He appeared tall and thin. In his arms, he held what looked like a small child. The child's body hung completely still. I dropped the rake. It struck the ground with a loud, metallic sound. I ran towards the slide, almost falling on the wet floor. I reached the ladder and looked up. The platform was empty. The man and the child had disappeared. Tap, tap, tap. A hand touched my shoulder 3 times. I jumped and spun around. Bernard stood behind me with a small smile on his face. "Chico, you need some sleep," he said. "You look terrible tonight." He placed one hand on my shoulder. For a moment, I could not speak. My face felt cold despite the heat. "Did you see that?" I finally asked. "See what?" He walked towards a nearby bench. I followed him. "The man," I said. He was standing on the slide. He was holding a child. Bernard sat down and looked at me carefully. "What are you talking about, Gyro? You know what? I'll finish your shift. Go home and rest." "No, I know what I saw. What exactly did you see?" A man was standing on the wooden platform above the blue slide. I pointed towards it. The moon was the only light over that part of the pool. The tunnel entrance looked like an open black mouth. Bernard suddenly grabbed the front of my lifeguard jacket. He whispered something under his breath and pulled me away. Before I could fully understand what was happening, he dragged me through reception and towards the staff parking area. We climbed into his car. He drove for what felt like hours, though it was probably only 20 or 30 minutes. "Bernard, what is going on?" I demanded. He gripped the steering wheel tightly. We passed palm trees, brightly painted houses, and empty bus stops. Streetlights shone across the rocky road. "Answer me," I said. "Why did you pull me out of there?" He glanced at me. Fear covered his face. I had never seen him look that way before. He took a heavy breath. "Why is it that every time someone disappears, none of the workers seem interested?" I asked. "Why does everyone act like nothing happened?" Bernard swerved to the side of the road and stopped the car. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he looked straight ahead and said, "The more people who disappear, the more money Delphine receives." His voice was flat, almost lifeless. Disgust rose into my throat. "Are you insane?" I shouted. "What are you hiding from me? What is happening at that place? Why aren't the police doing anything?" "You don't understand, Chico." He gave a nervous laugh and rubbed his fingers together. "Then explain it." It isn't easy. Working there is never easy. We all have good days and bad days. You handled everything well, Gyro. Better than most people would. But now you are asking questions that cannot be answered safely. What are you talking about? They are watching us, he whispered. They are always watching. We have to be careful. He started the car and returned to the road. Who is watching us? I asked. Aliens? Monsters? Unicorns? I laughed bitterly, hoping he would laugh too and tell me it was all some cruel joke. He did not. Worse, he said. The word caught in my throat. The reason you are in this car with me is because you are being watched, Bernard continued. I am trying to keep you safe. Watched by who? I saw a man holding a child. That child could belong to one of the families who had someone taken from them. That is your problem, Bernard said. You need to learn when to remain quiet, especially inside the resort. He gave me a weak, almost reassuring smile. Do you believe in things that aren't human? He asked. Entities, creatures. Stop talking about monsters and aliens. I turned towards the window. Bernard made a quiet sound, but did not argue. The people who disappeared were supposed to disappear, he said. We cannot discuss it at the resort. I turned back to him. By then, the road was surrounded by houses and bus stops. I assumed we were heading towards Bernard's home. I found something in the pool, I whispered. The little girl's underwear. My breath caught as Bernard continued staring at the road. What are you not telling me? I studied the man beside me and wondered whether I had ever truly known him. I dug my nails into my palm, watching every movement he made. After a long silence, Bernard cleared his throat. That resort is like a dream, he said in a low, rough voice. Every kind of child passes through it. My eyes widened. For one horrible moment, I misunderstood what he was saying. My entire body became stiff. My arms and legs felt trapped against the seat. I considered opening the door and jumping from the car. There were people on the streets now. I could scream for help and tell them I had been kidnapped by someone I thought was my friend. Then Bernard continued. At first, I thought I was losing my mind, he said. You meet the families who stay there. You learn their names. The children talk to you. They tell you they can do front flips in the pool or eat 10 desserts at the restaurant. You laugh with them. You start recognizing them every morning. His voice became quieter. Then one of them disappears. The next day, their chair is empty. Their parents are crying, and everyone around you behaves like it is normal. Some of the fear inside me loosened, but only for a moment. No one said anything, Bernard continued. Everyone pretended not to notice. But I asked questions. I spoke to the man who had your job before you arrived. This was before I was promoted. What happened to him? They told us he had accepted another job far from Catalonia. Bernard tightened his hands on the steering wheel. I never believed that story. He is dead. The car stopped at a red light. Bernard looked towards me. Then you arrived. You were innocent. You had no idea what kind of place you were entering. You were just happy to have a summer job. My heartbeat became painfully slow and heavy. As long as we work, follow orders, and do not complain about the disappearances, we remain safe, Bernard said. That is how it works. What are you saying? Do not make friends with the families. Do not become attached to the children. It will only make you suffer when one of them is chosen. I stared at him. Those were innocent children, I shouted. Someone did something horrible to them. I found part of it in the pool. We cannot stop it. Of course we can. We can call the police. The police cannot do anything. Why not? The resort has already made an agreement, Bernard said, and they are already there. What agreement? I asked. Coldness wrapped itself around my body. I looked at Bernard and saw the same dread and sadness on his face that had appeared when Alejandra and Rosetta vanished. For several seconds, he said nothing. His fingers stopped moving against the steering wheel. The car seemed completely silent, even though traffic passed around us and people walked beneath the streetlights outside. Then, Bernard finally turned towards me. We don't know what those things are, he whispered. But the only thing they desire is children. Story 3. When we die, our bodies do not always understand what has happened right away. Nobody really prepares you for that. They do not teach it properly in school, and even during medical training, people tend to explain it in a calm, scientific way that makes it sound less disturbing than it actually is. Most people like to imagine death as something clean and final. One moment, a person is alive. The next moment, they are gone. The heart stops, the lungs stop, and the body becomes still. But it is not always like that. Sometimes, the body lingers. Muscles tighten and release. Nerves continue firing without any purpose. Air trapped in the lungs moves through the throat and creates sounds. Fingers twitch. Jaws open. Limbs jerk suddenly. In rare cases, the entire body can move so violently that for one horrible second, it looks as if the person is trying to wake up. The first time I saw it happen was during my training. We were examining the body of an older man. I was leaning over the table, studying one of his arms and checking for marks on the skin. I was nervous, but I was trying hard not to show it. Then, the body jerked. Its hand snapped shut around my wrist. I screamed. Not a quiet gasp or a surprised sound. I screamed so loudly that everyone in the room turned toward me. One of the instructors laughed so hard that he had to sit down. "Relax," he said when he finally caught his breath. "He's not coming back." My face burned with embarrassment. Someone made a joke about zombies. Then I made one too, because that is what people do when something frightens them and they do not want anyone else to know. You laugh. You learn the science. You are told that muscles can contract after death. You learn about chemical changes in the tissue and electrical signals moving through damaged nerves. You memorize terms and repeat them during exams until the strange movements feel less mysterious. You tell yourself it is normal. Eventually, you stop reacting. By the time I started working full-time at the morgue, I had seen almost everything a dead body could do. I had heard bodies sigh when air escaped from their lungs. I had seen fingers bend, legs twitch, and eyelids move. Once, a man's stomach made such a loud noise that one of my coworkers dropped a tray. None of it frightened me anymore. The body was just a machine shutting down slowly. That was how I thought about it. All those movements were random, meaningless. Every single one had an explanation. At least, most of them did. He arrived on a Wednesday afternoon. Male, mid-40s. Approximately 6 feet 4 inches tall. Lean body. Dark hair with gray beginning to show around the temples. Short facial hair, uneven, as if he had not shaved in several days. His name was Harold M. The cause of death was listed as undetermined. That part of the report remained blank longer than usual. There were no obvious signs of injury. No broken bones, no cuts, no bruises serious enough to explain his death. There were no clear signs of an overdose and no visible symptoms of a disease that could be identified immediately. He had simply died. According to the intake report, he had been found inside his home. There were no signs of forced entry and no evidence of a struggle. Nothing in the house appeared to have been stolen. A neighbor had become worried after not seeing him for several days and had called the police. It happens more often than people realize. People die alone. Sometimes the cause is obvious. A heart attack, a stroke, an illness nobody knew about. Other times, the body offers no easy answer. Those cases always bothered me more than I wanted to admit. Jenna, one of my coworkers, stood beside me as she looked through the paperwork. Another mystery, she said. Looks like it. She glanced toward the body. He looks like he just stopped. That was exactly what I had been thinking. Jenna shrugged and closed the file. They'll figure it out upstairs. We both knew that was not always true. Some causes of death remain undetermined forever. The body is examined, samples are taken, tests are performed, and still no clear answer is found. Sometimes, people simply disappear from life without explaining why. I prepared Harold the same way I prepared everyone else. I cleaned him. I checked the identification tag. I entered his information into the log. Then I moved him into cold storage and placed him in one of the drawers. I wrote Mr. Harold in my personal notes. I always used names when I could. Some workers preferred case numbers. It made the job easier for them. A number did not have a family, a house, or a life outside the morgue. But I never liked reducing people to numbers. Using their names felt more respectful. For the first few days, there was nothing unusual about Mr. Harold then, near the end of one night shift. I noticed that the fingers on his right hand had moved. They had been resting straight when I first placed him inside the drawer. Now they were slightly curled toward the palm. I did not think much of it. Post-mortem contraction. Normal, I noted the movement and continued working. The next night, his jaw was slightly open. That was normal, too. After death, muscles loosen. The jaw can drop. Air can move through the throat. Still explainable. Still ordinary. By the third night, however, I began paying closer attention. It was not because Mr. Harold was moving dramatically. If he had sat up or turned his head while I was standing there, I would have run from the room immediately. But that was not what happened. His movements were small, subtle, easy to question. His left arm was resting at a slightly different angle than before. His shoulders seemed to sit differently against the metal tray. One foot was turned outward, even though I was almost certain I had placed it straight. I started wondering whether I was remembering his position incorrectly. That happens when you work long night shifts. Hours blend together. One body begins to look like another. You forget whether a hand was resting near the hip or closer to the edge of the tray. Still, something about him kept bothering me. One night, Jenna was sitting at a desk, completing paperwork, when I asked her about it. Have you ever seen a body move more than usual? She did not look up. They all move. I know. I mean, consistently. That made her stop writing. She glanced toward me. What are you thinking? I don't know. Which body? Harold M. She frowned for a second, trying to remember the case. The undetermined one? Yeah, what has he done? I immediately felt foolish. Nothing major. His hands keep changing position. His jaw moved. I think his head shifted, too. Jenna stared at me. Then she smiled. "You've been working nights for too long. Probably. You need sleep." "I know." She returned to her paperwork. I laughed quietly and tried to forget about it. But by the end of that week, I had started checking Mr. Harold's drawer more often. I told myself it was curiosity, not fear. During each round, I checked the temperatures, inspected the storage units, and made sure everything had been properly logged. Then, I stopped at his drawer. Every time I checked him, something seemed different. A hand was closer to the edge. A knee was slightly bent. One shoulder appeared higher than the other. Once, I was certain his head had turned a few degrees to the left. I stood there for several minutes, comparing his position with my memory. I considered taking photographs. The idea seemed ridiculous at first. Taking pictures of a body just to prove it had moved felt like the beginning of some ghost story. Still, I eventually used my phone to take a quick photograph. The next evening, I compared it with his position. His right hand had moved several inches. I stared at the screen. Then, I wondered whether I had accidentally moved him during an examination and forgotten. There were always explanations available. That was the dangerous thing. You could explain almost anything if you tried hard enough. The night everything changed was quieter than usual. The morgue was always quiet. But that night felt different. The building seemed completely empty. Even the usual sounds felt softer. The refrigeration units hummed steadily, and the fluorescent lights gave off a low electrical buzz. Jenna had gone outside for a break. I was alone. I had just finished updating a log when I walked into the storage room. That was when I saw it. Mr. Harold's drawer was slightly open, only a few inches. I stopped. The sight should not have frightened me. Drawers sometimes failed to close properly. The tracks were old, and if the tray had not been pushed all the way in, it could slide forward. But I knew I had closed it. I always checked twice. Push the tray in. Close the door. Pull the handle gently to make sure it was locked. It was a habit I had developed during training. "Jenna?" I called. No answer. I remembered she was still outside. I stood in the doorway, staring at the narrow black opening. I told myself the drawer had shifted. Old equipment, uneven floor, a simple mechanical problem. I walked toward it slowly. The metal handle felt cold beneath my fingers. I pulled the drawer open. It was empty. For several seconds, I did not understand what I was seeing. My mind refused to accept it. I stared at the tray and expected Harold's body to somehow appear. Maybe I had opened the wrong drawer. I checked the number. It was correct. Maybe someone had moved him. I checked the log. No transfer had been recorded. The drawer was empty. Mr. Harold was gone. My first reaction was not fear. It was procedure. Check the room. Check the other drawers. Check the paperwork. Check for mistakes. Bodies do not disappear. They can be transferred without proper notice. Workers can open the wrong drawer. Identification tags can be mixed up. There had to be an explanation. I searched the storage room, then the preparation area. I found him about 10 minutes later. He was lying on the floor, not directly beside the drawer, several feet away. He was face down, with both arms bent beneath his chest. His knees were drawn slightly inward. He did not look as though he had fallen. He looked positioned. For a moment, I thought Jenna had done it as a joke. It would have been cruel and completely against the rules, But that explanation still felt better than the alternative. "What kind of sick joke is this?" I whispered. There was no answer. I moved closer. Thin red marks ran along Harold's forearms and lower legs, abrasions, the kind caused by skin rubbing against a hard surface, against tile. It looked as though he had dragged himself. I stood over him, trying to force the scene into something logical. Maybe the drawer had rolled open. Maybe the tray had tilted. Maybe the body had slipped off and continued moving across the floor. But the distances did not work. The tray was not angled toward where he had been found. A body falling from that height would not land on its knees and forearms. Nothing about it made sense. I knelt beside him. "Mr. Harold," I said, without thinking. My voice sounded too loud. There was something strange about speaking to him, as if he could hear me. I placed one hand beneath his shoulder and another near his waist. His body was cold and heavy. I turned him over. His eyes were closed. His mouth was slightly open. He looked exactly as dead as he had before. I moved him back onto the tray. I arranged his arms at his sides, straightened his legs, and checked the identification tag. Then I pushed him back into the drawer. I closed it carefully. This time, my hands were shaking. When Jenna returned, I tried to explain what had happened. "Were you messing with Harold's drawer?" I asked. She stared at me. "What? Did you take him out? Why would I do that?" "I found him on the floor." She laughed at first, thinking I was joking. When she saw my face, the smile disappeared. "Are you serious?" "Yes, maybe he fell. He was several feet away." "How?" "I don't know." We went back to the storage room together. Harold's drawer was closed. Jenna opened it. He was lying exactly where I had placed him. She looked at me. Maybe the tray rolled out and he slipped. That doesn't explain the distance. What do you want me to say? I don't know. She inspected the track and the wheels. Nothing appeared broken. "There has to be an explanation," she said. I know, but I no longer believed it. I did not file a formal report. I should have. Instead, I kept quiet. I did not want to explain that I had found a dead man several feet away from his storage drawer with marks on his arms that looked as though he had crawled. I did not want to hear how impossible it sounded. That was the night I began feeling watched. The feeling did not arrive all at once. It slowly grew. At first, it was only a small pressure at the back of my mind, a quiet awareness that I was not alone. Of course, I was never truly alone in the morgue. There were bodies in almost every room. But bodies did not count. They were present, but they were not watching. That night, they felt different. Every time I turned away from the storage units, I imagined movement behind me. Every soft sound made me look over my shoulder. I checked the security cameras. The footage appeared normal at first. I watched myself enter the storage room. I watched Jenna leave for her break. Then the recording skipped, only for a few seconds. The time display jumped forward. I rewound it. The same thing happened again. A small section of footage was missing. I checked the other cameras. There were tiny gaps in several recordings. Some lasted only 1 or 2 seconds. Others lasted longer. I could not explain them. The system was old, but it had never behaved like that before. When I returned to the storage room, Harold's drawer was open again. This time, I did not tell myself it was faulty equipment. I knew I had closed it. I stood in the doorway, staring. The tray inside was empty. Something moved beyond the corner of the room. A shadow passed near the preparation area. I wanted to run. Instead, I moved forward. I do not know why. Maybe part of me still needed proof. Maybe I believed that once I saw what was happening, I could finally understand it. I turned the corner slowly. Mr. Harold was standing, not fully upright. His body leaned forward at a sharp angle. His spine was curved in a way that no living person would have been able to hold comfortably. His arms hung low, too low. His fingers almost touched the floor. His head was tilted to one side. It seemed to lag behind the movement of the rest of his body, as though his neck did not know how to support it. I stopped breathing. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then Harold shifted. It was a small movement, a correction. His body leaned slightly to the right, then back to the left. It looked like something was trying to understand balance. One of his legs jerked forward. The knee barely bent. His foot scraped across the tile and landed awkwardly. He took a step. It was not toward me. It was not toward the door. It had no clear direction or purpose. He simply moved forward, like a child learning how to walk, like a machine testing its parts. I could not scream. I could not move. I could only watch. His eyes were open. They were not wide with fear or anger. They were not searching the room. They stared ahead without focusing on anything. There was no recognition in them. No awareness. No sign that Harold, the person who had once lived inside that body, was still there. The body was empty. That was what frightened me most. If he had looked at me with anger, I could have believed he was a ghost. If he had spoken, I could have imagined that some part of him had returned. But there was nothing. The body moved without thought, without purpose, without life. The machine was still working even though the person who had controlled it was gone. Harold took another step. His head rolled slightly with the movement. His jaw opened. A low sound came from his throat as trapped air escaped. That finally broke me. I ran. I do not remember leaving the room. I do not remember grabbing my coat. I do not remember walking through the hallways or reaching the parking lot. My next clear memory is sitting inside my car with the doors locked, gripping the steering wheel so hard that my hands hurt. I never returned to the morgue. Jenna called me several times that night. Then, she sent messages. "Where did you go? Are you okay? What happened?" I did not answer. The next morning, my supervisor called. I ignored that call, too. I eventually sent a short message saying I could not return. I gave no explanation. What could I have said? A dead man stood up, but he was not alive. A body learned to walk without anyone inside it. They would have thought I was exhausted, unstable, or lying. Maybe I would have thought the same thing if someone else had told me. Jenna continued contacting me for several days. She said Harold's body was inside the drawer when she checked. She said nothing appeared unusual. She said the security footage had several corrupted sections, but that the system had been repaired. She wanted to know what I had seen. I never told her. I was left with no conclusion, only another case file that made no sense. Harold M. Mayo, mid-40s. Cause of death undetermined. I still think about him. I think about the small movements that came first. The fingers, the jaw, the head turning slowly on the tray. I think about the marks on his arms and legs. I think about the way he stood in that room, bent forward, trying to balance. Most of all, I think about his eyes. There was nothing inside them. No personality, no memory, no soul, if you believe in that kind of thing. Nothing was controlling him. And yet, he moved. Science can explain muscles tightening after death. It can explain electrical activity in damaged nerves. It can explain trapped air, twitching fingers, and moving jaws. But can it explain a body leaving a drawer? Can it explain crawling across a room? Can it explain standing? Can it explain learning how to take a step? There was no intelligence left inside Harold. There was no person operating the body. But the body still seemed to remember that it had once moved. It remembered that legs were meant to support weight. It remembered that feet were meant to step forward. It remembered just enough to try. I used to believe our bodies belonged to us. I believed the mind gave every command and the body followed. But after seeing Harold, I am not sure anymore. Maybe the body remembers more than we understand. Maybe every movement we make leaves something behind in our muscles and nerves. Maybe, after the person is gone, the body keeps searching for instructions that will never come. Or maybe something else entered him. Something without thought or identity. Something that found an empty machine and began learning how to use it. I do not know which possibility frightens me more. There was nothing inside Mr. Harold. Nothing living. Nothing aware. So what taught him to stand? And if a body can continue moving without the person who once lived inside it, then what part of us actually makes us human? Story 4. This story is not mine to share. I was not there when it happened, and I never saw any proof that the events described in it were real. I cannot show you a photograph, a military report, or the testimony of another soldier who was present. All I have is a letter that was written more than 20 years ago by someone I loved and trusted. The story belonged to my older brother, Steve. He never gave me permission to tell anyone about it. He certainly never gave me permission to post it on the internet. For a long time, I kept the letter hidden in an old box with photographs, birthday cards, and other things I could not bring myself to throw away. I have never had a paranormal experience of my own. I have never seen a ghost, heard a voice in an empty room, or watched an object move without being touched. If strange things exist in this world, they have always kept their distance from me. My brother was different, or at least something happened to him that he could not explain. Back in 2001, Steve suddenly dropped out of college. The news shocked our parents. Steve had always been the golden child of the family. He was everything our parents wanted a son to be. He was athletic, intelligent, confident, and hardworking. While I spent most of my childhood inside playing video games, reading comic books, and watching shows about ghosts and aliens, Steve was outside running, lifting weights, playing football, or practicing for one sport or another. He earned excellent grades without appearing to struggle. Teachers liked him. Coaches respected him. Other students wanted to be around him. Our parents treated him like their greatest achievement. Every Sunday morning, they made him wear his best suit to church. They would introduce him to people who already knew him and talk proudly about his grades, his sports, and whatever award he had recently won. The way they displayed him, you would have thought he was some kind of miracle sent directly to our family. Steve hated church. He never said that in front of our parents, but he told me often enough. He hated waking up early on Sundays. He hated wearing a tie. He hated shaking hands with old people who asked him the same questions every week. Still, he went because it made Mom and Dad happy. That was how Steve lived most of his life. He did what people expected him to do. He played the right sports, earned the right grades, smiled at the right people, and accepted praise even when it made him uncomfortable. By the time he reached college, I think he had finally had enough. One afternoon, he came home in the middle of the school term without calling anyone first. He walked into the house carrying 2 large bags and placed them in the hallway. Mom stared at him as if she had seen a dead man walk through the door. Dad immediately asked what had happened. Steve told them he had dropped out. For several seconds, neither of our parents spoke. Then, the shouting began. They demanded to know why he had thrown away his future. They asked whether he was failing, using drugs, or having some kind of breakdown. Dad accused him of being ungrateful. Mom started crying and said she did not understand where they had gone wrong. Steve stood quietly until they finished. Then, he told them he was joining the United States military. That announcement frightened them even more than the first one. Our parents had expected Steve to become a doctor, lawyer, engineer, or successful businessman. They had imagined him graduating from college, buying a large house, and giving them grandchildren they could brag about. They had never imagined him carrying a rifle in another country. I was surprised, but not as surprised as they were. Looking back, the signs had always been there. Steve was the toughest person I knew. He loved physical challenges and seemed happiest when he was exhausted, dirty, and pushing himself past his limits. He also watched the same war movies again and again, especially films about Vietnam. He knew the names of weapons, battles, commanders, and military units. He could talk for hours about tactics and survival. At the time, I thought it was only another interest. For Steve, it had probably been a plan. He kept his word and enlisted. For the next few months, we hardly heard from him. Our parents worried constantly, though Dad tried to hide it. Mom jumped every time the phone rang. We saw Steve again when he graduated from boot camp. He looked different. His hair was cut short, his face seemed harder, and he stood straighter than before. He looked proud, but he also looked tired in a way I had never seen. Our parents smiled for photographs and told him how proud they were. Mom cried when it was time to leave. We knew it would probably be a long time before we saw him again. Not long afterward, Steve was sent overseas. He would spend around a year serving in Afghanistan, mostly in and around Kandahar province. At the time, the war was still new. Every day, the news showed soldiers, explosions, mountains, and dry roads. Our parents watched every report, searching the screen as if Steve might suddenly appear in the background. Our only regular contact with him came through letters. Steve wrote whenever he could. Most of the letters were short and careful. He told us he was safe. He said the food was terrible, the heat was worse, and he missed sleeping in a real bed. He never gave many details about what he was doing. Sometimes he mentioned other soldiers by name. He wrote about a man called Longo, who apparently snored loudly enough to keep everyone awake. He mentioned Carmichael, who was one of the best shots in their unit. There was also Ethan, who read books whenever he had a free moment. The letters helped our parents believe everything was fine. Around 5 months into Steve's tour, the letters became less frequent. Weeks passed without anything. Mom became convinced that something had happened to him. Dad told her that military operations often made communication difficult, but I could see that he was worried too. Then, around the 9th or 10th month of Steve's deployment, 2 letters arrived. One was addressed to our parents. The other was addressed only to me. The letter from Mom and Dad was ordinary. Steve apologized for not writing sooner. He explained that circumstances had made it difficult to send mail, but he assured them he was alive and safe. He told them not to worry. The letter he sent me was very different. It had been written on several rough sheets of paper. Some parts were neat, but other sections looked rushed. A few words had been crossed out and rewritten. As I read it, I felt an increasing sense of fear. Steve had never believed in the paranormal. Whenever I talked about ghosts, aliens, monsters, or strange disappearances, he laughed at me. He called the shows I watched stupid and said people saw what they wanted to see. That was why the letter frightened me so much. Steve was not the kind of person who invented ghost stories. These are the words he wrote to me, rewritten only to make the story clearer. He began by apologizing for not writing sooner. He said he hoped I was doing well in school and joked that he also hoped no one was beating me up. Then his tone changed. Before I continued reading, he wanted me to promise him something. He told me not to show the letter to Mom or Dad. I was not supposed to tell them what it said. If they asked, I should only repeat the safe information he had included in their letter. He made the warning several times. Do not tell Mom and Dad. He said he was writing to me for two reasons. The first was to let me know he was still alive. The second was because something had happened, and he needed to tell someone. Our parents would not understand. They would panic or assume the stress of war had damaged his mind. I, however, had always been interested in ghosts and unexplained things. That was why he chose me. Steve wrote that his division had been operating in Kandahar province for several months. Much of the enemy activity had been forced out of the immediate area, but soldiers were still being sent into the mountains to search for anyone hiding there. About a week before he wrote the letter, Steve had been placed on one of those teams. Longo had gone with him. The group followed a narrow path into the mountains. The land was dry, rough, and almost completely empty. There were no villages nearby and no sign that anyone had traveled through the area recently. According to Steve, they must have been the only people for miles. They had climbed about halfway up the path when the team stopped to rest and drink water. The day was extremely hot. The sun reflected off the pale rocks, and the air itself seemed to shake in the distance. The mountains were silent, except for the soldiers talking among themselves and the occasional sound of equipment moving. Steve was drinking from his canteen when he suddenly felt that someone was watching them. It was not an unusual feeling. He often felt exposed when the team was crossing open ground. In that environment, danger could be hiding behind a rock, along a ridge, or inside a distant opening. His training told him to pay attention to that feeling. He slowly looked around. At first, he saw nothing except stone, dust, and the mountain path. Then he noticed a figure standing beneath a nearby ridge. The person was far away, perhaps 500 feet from their position. Because of the heat and the moving air, Steve's eyes had trouble focusing. Still, he was certain he saw a man. Steve could not immediately tell whether the man was an enemy fighter or a local shepherd. He alerted the rest of the team. Everyone turned toward the ridge. No one else saw anything. Carmichael used the scope on his weapon to examine the area more carefully. He searched the rocks, the lower part of the ridge, and the ground around it. He saw no person. The other soldiers decided Steve had mistaken a rock formation for a man. They joked that the heat was making him see things. Steve ignored them and looked again. The man was still there. This time, Steve studied him more carefully. The figure stood directly beneath the ridge and faced the soldiers. He did not move, wave, hide, or react to the fact that armed men were watching his position. Steve quickly realized that the figure did not look like a local fighter. He did not look like a shepherd either. The man wore torn pieces of red cloth. The material covered only part of his chest and body, leaving much of his skin exposed. In his right hand, he carried a long wooden object. At first, Steve thought it was a walking staff, but the end appeared sharp, almost like a spearhead. Something covered the man's head. From a distance, Steve first believed it might be a turban. When he looked more carefully, he realized the object was hard and strangely shaped. It was long, narrow, and bronze in color. It looked like an ancient helmet. Steve described the figure to the rest of his team. A man dressed in torn red cloth, a wooden spear, a long bronze helmet. No one else could see him. Carmichael checked again through his scope and still found nothing beneath the ridge. The team was not willing to remain in one place, because one soldier thought he had seen a strangely dressed man. They told Steve to keep moving and continued up the mountain path. Steve followed them. Before leaving, he looked back one final time. The figure had disappeared. Nothing remained beneath the ridge. For the rest of the mission, Steve tried to convince himself that the man had been a mirage. The intense heat could make distant objects look strange. Shadows moved across the mountains, and groups of rocks sometimes formed shapes that looked human. He might have seen something ordinary and allowed his imagination to complete the image. That explanation would have been enough if seeing the figure had been the only strange thing that happened. But Steve had also heard it speak. He wrote that the man beneath the ridge had spoken directly to him. The figure had been hundreds of feet away. Even if the man had shouted, it should have been difficult to hear him clearly over that distance. Instead, the voice sounded as if someone were standing directly beside Steve, whispering into his ear. None of the other soldiers reacted. They did not hear anything. Steve did not understand the words, but he repeated them silently so he would not forget. He wrote the phrase as something like, "Enfade pese." He continued repeating it throughout the day. By the time the team returned to base, the words were fixed in his mind. That evening, another soldier named Ethan heard Steve whispering the phrase. Ethan asked why he kept saying it. Steve told him he did not know what it meant. He had assumed it might be Dari or another language spoken in the area. Ethan disagreed. Before joining the military, Ethan had studied Greek in school. The sounds were not exactly clear, but they reminded him of Greek. Steve repeated the phrase several more times. Eventually, Ethan believed he understood it. The words, according to him, were closer to enfade pese. Ethan said the phrase meant, "You will fall here." The meaning could also be understood as, "You will die here." Steve wrote that he knew how crazy the story sounded. He swore to me that he was not joking. He had seen the figure beneath the ridge, and he had heard the voice speak. Perhaps the heat had caused him to hallucinate. Perhaps the stress, lack of sleep, or fear had affected him. But that did not explain everything. Why would he imagine an ancient Greek soldier in the mountains of Afghanistan? Why would the imagined soldier speak Greek? Most importantly, how could Steve hear and remember a phrase from a language he did not know? He had never studied Greek. He did not know even a single word of it. Yet Ethan had understood the sentence. Steve then asked if I knew what soldiers sometimes called Afghanistan. They called it the graveyard of empires. Foreign armies had entered the region for centuries. Great powers had tried to conquer or control it. Some succeeded for a while, but none remained forever. Persians, Mongols, British forces, Russians, and now Americans had traveled through its valleys, deserts, and mountains. Empires came to Afghanistan. Eventually, they left, failed, or fell. Steve reminded me that Alexander the Great had also conquered parts of the region. He added that if I did not know who Alexander was, I was a dumbass and needed to pay more attention in school. That line sounded exactly like my brother. Alexander had been a Macedonian king who created one of the largest empires of the ancient world. His armies moved through the Middle East and deep into Asia. Kandahar and the surrounding region had been among his conquests. That history gave Steve a terrible idea. He believed the figure he had seen was the ghost of an ancient Greek or Macedonian soldier. The man might have died during Alexander's campaigns more than 2,000 years earlier. He might have fought and fallen in those same mountains. If the apparition was real, it had appeared to Steve for a reason. It had warned him that he would die there, too. Steve admitted that he had not felt the same since that day. He could not stop thinking about the message. Every time his unit left the base, he wondered whether that would be his final mission. Every distant sound made him expect an attack. Every path through the mountains seemed like the place where the ancient soldier's warning might come true. Something inside him believed he would never return home. He prayed that he was wrong. He promised that he would fight as hard as he could to survive. Still, he wanted to make peace with the possibility that he might die. That was why he wrote to me. He needed someone to know what he had seen. He reminded me that I knew him better than most people. I knew he had never believed in ghosts, spirits, or monsters. He had always laughed at those ideas. But he also knew what he had seen beneath the ridge. He knew what he had heard in his ear. If the ghost's warning was true and he never returned home, Steve wanted me to know that he loved me. We had fought many times when we were younger. Steve was bigger, stronger, and better at almost everything. He teased me, stole the television remote, and sometimes treated me like an annoying child who followed him everywhere. I resented him for being our parents' favorite. He knew that. I think part of him had always felt guilty about it. In the letter, he wrote that none of our childhood arguments mattered anymore. I would always be his little brother. He told me not to be so hard on Mom and Dad. He admitted that they could be controlling and overbearing, but he had already caused them enough pain by leaving college and joining the military. If something happened to him, he did not want me to make their lives more difficult. Then he asked me to make more of an effort in school. He knew it was a lot to ask, especially coming from him. Still, he wanted me to have the best future possible. He joked that the words sounded lame, but he meant them. Finally, Steve said that perhaps none of his fears would come true. Maybe God would be kind and allow him to return home safely. If that happened, the two of us could sit together, laugh about the letter, and make fun of the idea that he had seen a dead Macedonian soldier in the Afghan mountains. No matter what happened, however, he wanted me to remember that he loved me. He ended the letter with the words, "From your loving brother Steve." I read the letter several times. At first, I did not know what to think. Part of me was excited because my brother had finally experienced the kind of paranormal event I had always wanted to hear about. That excitement quickly disappeared when I understood how frightened he had been. Steve was not easily scared. As a child, he had jumped from roofs, explored abandoned buildings, and walked into fights without thinking twice. He had joined the military during a war, despite our parents begging him not to go. Yet the figure beneath that ridge had terrified him enough to write what sounded like a goodbye letter. I kept my promise. I did not tell our parents. When Mom asked what Steve had written, I said he had joked about school and told me to behave. I repeated some of the harmless details from their letter and pretended everything was normal. Then I hid Steve's letter in my bedroom. For weeks, I waited for another message. Each day, I checked the mail. Each time the phone rang, I looked at our parents and wondered whether the call would bring terrible news. I also began reading everything I could find about Alexander the Great and his campaigns. I looked at pictures of ancient Macedonian soldiers. Many of them carried long spears. Some wore red cloth. Some had bronze helmets with long or unusual shapes. The images looked close enough to Steve's description to make me uncomfortable. Still, I tried to find ordinary explanations. Maybe Steve had once seen a similar picture in a book or film and forgotten it. Perhaps his mind used that forgotten image during a moment of heat exhaustion. Maybe Ethan had misunderstood the sounds and connected them to a Greek phrase only by chance. Maybe the warning had never existed anywhere except inside my brother's frightened mind. Those explanations helped during the day. At night, I imagined a lonely soldier standing beneath a mountain ridge for more than 2,000 years, waiting for another foreign army to arrive. I wondered how many men he had warned. I wondered how many had ignored him. Most of all, I wondered whether he had truly known Steve's future. I will not tell you whether my brother returned home. That part of the story still belongs to my family, and even after sharing the letter, there are some details I cannot bring myself to place in front of strangers. Perhaps that makes the story less satisfying. Real life often is. All I can say is that I still have the letter. The paper has become yellow around the edges. The folds are weak, and some of the writing has begun to fade. I keep it protected now, but I still take it out from time to time. Whenever I read it, I hear Steve's voice. I hear him teasing me about school. I hear him telling me not to upset our parents. I hear him trying to sound brave while admitting that he believed he was going to die. And sometimes, when I reach the part about the figure beneath the ridge, I imagine the mountains as Steve described them. I see the empty path beneath the burning sun. I see a group of soldiers resting among the rocks. Far away, under the shadow of a ridge, a man stands alone. His red clothing is torn and faded. A bronze helmet covers his head. A long spear rests in his hand. No one can see him except my brother. Then the figure turns his face towards Steve and speaks across more than 2,000 years of war. You will fall here. Story 5. My brother Micah was diagnosed with schizophrenia when he was 16 years old. I was nearly 14 at the time. Before that, he had always been the loud one in our family. He laughed without caring who heard him. He made jokes at dinner, played football in the garden, and walked into every room as if it belonged to him. He had friends constantly calling the house, and there was always music coming from his bedroom. Then, almost without warning, he changed. His first serious episode lasted for several days. At first, my parents thought he had not been sleeping. He spoke too quickly, jumped from one subject to another, and became angry whenever anyone asked him to slow down. He said people were following him. He said the electricity inside the walls was carrying messages. He covered the mirrors in his room because he believed something was watching him through them. None of us knew what to do. One night, everything became much worse. After that, Micah spent a month inside a psychiatric hospital. My parents called it an institute because the word hospital frightened them less. They told relatives that he was resting. They told the neighbors he was receiving treatment for stress. I was also in hospital during that month. My parents never spoke openly about what had happened between Micah and me. They did not need to. The scars on my hand told enough of the story. When Micah was allowed to return home, he was taking several kinds of medication. At first, the pills seemed to help. He stopped talking about voices. He no longer covered the mirrors or stared at the power lines outside. But something else disappeared, too. He slept most of the day. He moved slowly and spoke even more slowly. He gained weight at first, then lost it again. He tried to work several jobs, but could not keep any of them. He tried dating once or twice, but those relationships ended quickly. Eventually, he stopped trying. He rarely left the house. He did not visit friends. He did not go to parties. He did not seem to have any plans for the future. He had hobbies, or at least I believed he did, but he never told us what they were. After his episode, he and I almost never spoke. Sometimes he tried. He would stand in a doorway and ask what I was watching, or whether I wanted something from the kitchen. I usually answered with one word. Other times I pretended not to hear him. I knew he was sick. I knew he had not chosen what happened. But knowing that did not remove the fear from my body whenever he entered a room. By the time I moved out, Micah was 20 years old and completely dependent on our parents. My father made his appointments, collected his medication, cooked his meals, and reminded him to shower. My mother barely looked at him anymore. Dinner was the worst part of living there. The four of us would sit around the table in complete silence. My father sometimes tried to begin a conversation. He would ask Micah if he had watched anything interesting or if he wanted to go for a walk the next morning. Micah would move food around his plate and give a quiet answer. My mother would keep her eyes down. I would eat as quickly as possible. The silence felt heavier whenever Micah was in the room. Even when he was doing nothing, I felt his presence behind me. Every footstep in the hallway made my shoulders tighten. He had become cold and distant, a ghost of the boy who once laughed as if he owned every room he entered. When I announced that I was leaving, no one protested. My father nodded and said it was probably good for me to have my own space. My mother asked whether I needed help packing. Micah continued playing with a piece of asparagus on his plate. On the morning I moved, my father and I carried bags of clothing downstairs. As I passed Micah's room, I noticed the door was slightly open. I looked inside. Compared to my room, his looked almost like a padded cell. The walls were white. The furniture was white. There were no posters, photographs, or decorations. Even the bed sheets were pale and plain. There was nothing personal in there. I wondered how much his illness had taken from him. Then I looked at my damaged hand. I thought about the surgeries, physiotherapy, and years of learning to use my fingers again. I knew what his illness had taken from me, too. That thought swallowed my sympathy. Anger crawled through my arms and settled in both fists, although one of them could not fully close without pain. I moved away from his room and did not say goodbye. Years passed. I found work, rented a small house, and built a life that had very little connection to my family. I called my father occasionally. I spoke to my mother even less. I never called Micah. Then, 1 week before he died, he appeared outside my house during a storm. He was 26 years old. Rain fell heavily, rushing from the roof and spilling onto the ground. The sky flashed white with distant lightning, and for a moment I saw him clearly through the glass of my front door. He looked like a disheveled shell of the brother I remembered. His hair was greasy and tangled, hanging across his thin face like wet vines. He had a messy beard and deep shadows beneath his eyes. His clothes looked too large for him, and he held an old book tightly against his chest as if it were a baby. I opened the door, but did not invite him inside. "Micah?" Lightning flashed again somewhere beyond the houses. He looked up at me. When he spoke, the words came out strangely. He sounded like someone reading a difficult script, stopping to understand each word before saying it. Hey, Abel, and nice house. How have you been?" I did not answer immediately. Looking at him brought everything back. The hospital, the blood, the pain in my hand, the years of physiotherapy, the panic attacks whenever someone entered my room without knocking. I wondered what I owed him. He was my brother, but he was also the reason my hand would never work properly again. Micah's face fell. At first, I saw only the sadness I had expected. Then I noticed something else beneath it. Hope. He had come to my house, carrying hope, and I had destroyed it with a few seconds of silence. He turned to leave. Before I could think, I reached out and grabbed his wrist. "Wait," he froze. I took a deep breath. He was sick. He had never meant to hurt me. He was still my brother. I repeated those thoughts inside my head like a prayer until my anger became quiet enough for me to speak. "Come in," I said. "It's far too wet to stay outside." Micah stepped into the house. His presence made me uncomfortable immediately. It was not anything he did. He stood quietly near the door and waited for instructions. But my body remembered him even when my mind tried to forgive him. I gave him a towel, some clean clothes, and a can of deodorant. I hoped he might smile or make a joke. He did not. My clothes were medium-sized, but they still hung loosely from his thin frame. His wrists looked too narrow. His collarbones pushed against the shirt. I warmed some leftover Chinese food in the microwave. Micah sat at the kitchen table without speaking. Under the brighter light, I could see him properly. His beard was uneven, with long, twisted hairs growing down his neck. Red patches covered parts of his skin. His eyes were bloodshot, and the dark circles beneath them made him look much older than he was. When he lifted his arm, the sleeve moved slightly. I saw fresh cuts around his forearm. They were close enough to the edge of the sleeve that I knew he had not tried very hard to hide them. "I'm off the medication," he said. I turned around, slowly. The confession sent a cold fear through me. It moved through my body and swallowed the small amount of warmth I had felt toward him. For a moment, I was 14 again. Then I looked at him properly. He was so thin and weak that it was difficult to imagine him hurting anyone. He looked as though a strong wind could break him apart. Still, I took every knife from the kitchen drawer. Micah watched as I climbed onto the counter and placed them on top of a tall cabinet where neither of us could reach them from the floor. "I understand," he said quietly. "I'm sorry. It's okay." There was a 4-pack of beer on top of the refrigerator. I remained sitting on the counter, reached for one, and opened it. "I shouldn't drink in front of you," I said. "It's okay," he repeated. "It's honest." The strange broken sound in his voice had become a soft whimper. He moved small pieces of chicken around his plate before eating one. It took him several bites. I felt strangely parental, For years, I had avoided him and told myself I had no responsibility for his life. Now, I was watching him eat as if he were a frightened child. I sat beside him and took a piece of chicken. I ate it in one bite. Micah chewed slowly. I reached for the beer with my damaged hand. He stared at it. My fingers shook as I forced them to close around the can. It took several seconds before I managed to lift it. I raised it awkwardly to my mouth and took a small sip. "I'm so sorry," Micah said. I waved my hand, trying to dismiss the comment. "It's fine." "I'm sorry," he repeated. This time, I understood what he meant. The kitchen became completely silent. Moonlight came through the blinds in narrow lines, making the room look like the entrance to a cave. I wondered how long he had carried that guilt. Years, perhaps. I could not find a response that felt good enough. Instead, I stood and gave him a beer. After we finished the first cans, we opened another two. I built him a rough bed on the couch using spare blankets, duvet covers, and old clothes. I placed the clothes underneath to make the couch softer. Micah sat on the edge of the bed while I took a chair across from him. Lightning flashed outside again. A moment later, the power went out. The house fell into darkness. I turned on the light on my phone and placed it on the table between us. The light shone upward across Micah's face, creating deep shadows around his eyes and cheeks. For a second, he did not look like my brother. He looked like something wearing Micah's skin and doing a poor job of it. "How have you been?" I asked. He made a tired sound. He seemed more comfortable now, either because of the beer or because I had finally allowed him to sit beside me without looking at him like a monster. "I'm not alive, Abe," he said. "I'm a walking pill. I'm a percentage taken from Dad's pay. I'm an unstable tax." I did not fully understand the last sentence, but I understood what he meant. "You stopped taking medication," I said. "Do you think being dangerous to everyone around you is better?" The words sounded more hostile than I intended. Micah did not seem angry. Maybe no one had spoken honestly to him in years. "I'd rather be dead and gone than numb and present," he said. I sighed and finished my beer. The worst part was that his words made sense to me. Micah reached forward and held my damaged hand between both of his. His touch was gentle. My body jumped anyway. I felt ashamed that I was frightened. "I can be okay," he said. "I just need to learn to live with it, Abe, without pills." There was real belief in his voice. I knew he meant every word. I told him he could stay with me for several days. I said we could speak to someone and make a plan. I would not force him to return home that night. He shook his head. "I don't want days," he said. "I just want one night. Like we're boys again. Like a sleepover." I went upstairs without answering. Then I dragged my mattress and duvet down to the living room. When Micah saw what I was doing, I heard him begin to cry quietly. "I'm sorry I never took the first step," I said. "I should have tried to.